All right, shall we crack on with the content then? I'm gonna share my screen in a second, so you'll be able to go through the slides with me. A few housekeeping things to start with. Firstly, warm welcome along to what is the first Jarang webinar that we're doing. 5 ways email marketing can boost your festive season. So as we get into the early part of October, no better time to focus on this. So as we mentioned in our blurb for this session, hopefully this will be of use and it will be valuable regardless of whether you are just starting to put things together or whether you've had things in place for months and months and you just need a few last things to perhaps have a review of before you get into the very busy time of year that are the next 3 months. Thank you to everyone who is joining us live for this session. Very much appreciated given how busy everyone's days are. But of course, you can listen to this session after we're done. So this is being recorded and you'll be able to go back and perhaps review anything a second time, or indeed, if you need to shoot off early for whatever reason, it will be all available to you. There is a Q&A functionality as well within this webinar. So if you have any questions as we go through the various tips that we've got available to you, please just let us know and we'll do a full recap at the end of the session, about 5-10 minutes, where we'll be reviewing any questions that you might have. But before we go any further, better to do an overview of the session itself and indeed who we are presenting it. So we're going to be presenting our 5 top tips. A Q&A session at the end, as mentioned. My name's Ben Hocking. I'm a client success manager here at Jarang. And I'm joined, thankfully for all of you, that it won't be 45 minutes of just me talking, Guy Hansen from Validity. And I'll let Guy introduce himself.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad we've made it happen. I know we've been talking about this for a while, Ben, so very cool. We've got our act together, and welcome to everyone on the webinar. My name's Guy Hansen. As the title tells you, I'm VP of Customer Engagement at Validity. I do a lot of Validity's event speaking, know a reasonable amount about email deliverability, which hopefully we'll share a bit today. And outside of my day job, a long-established relationship with the DMA. I'm actually in the DMA offices today, working on their email council and producing a lot of the email research which comes out of that body. So great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No problem at all. Thank you for being here. As I'm sure there's a varying degree of knowledge about who Jarang are within the attendees today. I'm sure some of you know everything you need to know about us, but there are going to be those who don't know everything we do. Jarang founded in 2003, so we're coming up on 20 years in operation. We provide our clients with expertise within the email marketing industry. We're fully dedicated towards email marketing management. And you can see some of the services we provide there on the right-hand side, ranges from consultancy to data work, to design work, and everything in between. Before we get into the 5 tips themselves, it's probably a good idea just to pause a second and actually think, okay, why is Q4 important in the first place? And I'm sure some of these are going to be no surprise to you as to why it's important. Multiple major dates, of course, happen within the marketing calendar in Q4. The 2 that will, of course, get the most mentions at any time will be Christmas and Black Friday, that, of course, are very intrinsically linked. Major marketing dates on the calendar, but there are others as well that can be featured as well. When you delve into it and you think, you've also got Halloween, you've also got Bonfire Night, Thanksgiving Day, Diwali. All of these events are happening within these 3 months, and it's a real opportunity to make the most of them. For retailers specifically, an average of 20% of yearly sales occur between November and December. So again, as I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone within that sector today, how you perform in November and December can often dictate how the following 9 months or so will look. And roughly 20% of all online visits in the festive season occur off the back of email marketing. So that's really linking back to how can email marketing specifically help you out in this quarter. And there you can see at the bottom there, 116.5 million emails sent on Black Friday last year alone. That's a big number. And I'm sure there's no surprise in me saying that that doesn't look like it's going to slow down this year whatsoever.
So having set the scene in terms of why it's important, there's also going to be some challenges for email programs in Q4. I think the first one sort of touches on that last point that Ben made. Back in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic first struck, global email marketing volumes increased by around 60%, almost overnight from March to April as lockdown happened. And we wondered if that was a high watermark, but no, it continued to grow another 15% in 2021. And as you can see from this year's volume chart, which you got on the screen at the moment, the green line shows that the trend is continuing to be upwards. And the areas that I've highlighted in light orange on the right is the most recent couple of months. On the left is last year's peak sales season, which Ben was just talking about. You can see they're near identical. This year is almost certainly going to set new volume records, and that's going to make deliverability harder. And it also means that competition for iShare in the inbox and for share of wallet is going to be brutal. I think some of the other key points, Ben talked about all the different events. I think what we've also seen is, the sort of marketing calendar equivalent of scope creep. Black Friday has become Black November, Cyber Week, instead of Cyber Monday. What used to be a sort of a 5 or 6 week period, which basically started at the beginning of December and ran through to the January sales, is now closer to 3 weeks. So there's a huge risk of subscriber fatigue. You're talking, and that's going to translate into more spam complaints, more emails going deleted unread, general inactivity. That makes deliverability harder as well. Apple MPP has also created new challenges. So Apple now automatically downloads all email images, and that includes your tracking pixels. And so it's giving the misleading impression that many emails are opened when that's not actually the case. That's making measurement of email engagement harder. And so best practices like recency management and inactive suppressions are becoming harder too. And then I think it probably goes without saying, final factor, making general email engagement and certainly deliverability harder is just the current economic landscape. You've got a combination of global factors, means that many countries are poised on the edge of a vicious recession right now. Consumers are already experiencing financial hardship, and they're definitely reining in their discretionary spending. There's a great new report from the DMA, How to Win Trust and Loyalty, on this topic. Thoroughly recommend you get a copy. Okay, Ben, move on.
Thank you. So as you will notice as we go through these tips, none of them operate within a vacuum. All 5 of them are going to be very linked with one another. So we'll start with the first one. This will probably dovetail quite nicely into Guy's specific one as well, because it all starts with data. There is a very good reason why this is the first one that we've picked out, because ultimately, as much time as you spend on content, as much time as you spend on copy and design, it's all for nothing if the data isn't in place to begin with. It all falls down if the data is not sorted. Now, in terms of the data itself, the problem that you might have can be quite varied business to business. So you might not have the data you need in order to pull off the marketing objectives that you have. But ultimately, it might also go a bit deeper than that. So you might actually have the data you need in order to fulfill your objectives, but you might find that you don't actually know the best way to use it. Or even in some cases, you might know how to use it, but you don't know the whys and the whens. It's all very important when it comes to getting the data sorted in the first place and making sure that relevant segmented campaigns are really at the forefront of everything you're doing from an email marketing perspective. So relevant personalized content. I'm very adamant when it comes to email marketing that this is the #1 strength of email marketing when done correctly, is when it's relevant and it's personalized. You can see on the right-hand side there an image from Sales Cycle as to what are the major benefits of doing so. But it's an increase in the important metrics. It's an increase in click-through rate. It's an increase in conversion, in sales, customer satisfaction. It's all there. And ultimately relevancy, why is it specific to Q4? Because it's certainly a tip that can be applied year round. But the reason it's here within the Q4 spectrum is because, as we've already alluded to, the inbox gets more and more crowded as you go throughout Q4. So the idea of being relevant, the idea of being personalized, it becomes even more important when you're competing with seemingly every single brand that exists on dates like Black Friday and in the lead up to Christmas. And that quite nicely leads into segmentation. So segmentation really does get to the heart of what your subscribers are interested in. And segmentation can form various different categories that you've got at the bottom there. But just to pick out a few, behavioral profile fields, behavioral understanding, that can lead to segmentation within your campaigns, where they are in your life cycle. So are they a prospect? Have they just found their way onto your marketing database, or have they been there for years? Again, you could talk to them all in exactly the same way. That is doable, but it's certainly not advisable, because whilst you might have 2 people on your database, you know that they have a shared interest in your business, but that could literally be the only thing that connects them. They might be interested in 2 radically different things about your business. It could be 2 completely different product streams. It could be 2 completely different services that you provide. And even the whys as to why they like your brand, that can be completely different. So you could speak to them in the same way, but you're probably missing out on an opportunity to get real tailored content through to these people. And then what worked previously. So again, data can be previous data that you've collected in terms of results. So go back to 2021, go back to 2020, go back further if you think it's relevant. What worked for you in previous years? It seems like an obvious one, but in reality, it's not done as often as you think it would be done. If you go back and first of all identify what worked well from a campaign perspective, say you sent 4 or 5 campaigns in a 4-week stretch, which of them performed the best, which of them performed the worst? That's step 1. Step 2 is the crucial one, though, because you need to identify why. It's all very well saying this campaign did far better in terms of a click-through rate, but if you're not able to identify why that was the case, then it's kind of for nothing. Maybe it's subject line. Maybe you can look back at the heat maps or the click maps and identify what stories perform well. Was it a specific story within a newsletter that drove click-through rate or drove conversion? Find the metrics that matter most to you. Use that as the basis to understand whether something worked well, and then incorporate it into what you've got this year. It shouldn't be a replication, of course, but you can certainly take ideas that you've developed from your own results into your current program. Guy, I don't know if you wanted to mention something here regarding address validation. I know that's very valuable when it comes to data.
I will touch on that when we get to my section, but certainly, for me, great data quality starts a great acquisition. I'm a big fan of email programs using double opt-in as their permissioning mechanic to make sure they're bringing great addresses into their program. I feel like the use of functionality like capture routines is vital to try and eliminate a lot of bot-driven signups, which we're seeing more and more of these days. And yeah, sort of real-time validation and bulk validation, particularly important as you start to prepare for a busy season like this. And we'll touch on that in a few minutes' time.
Absolutely. And as already mentioned, some of these tips are going to very heavily link with one another. The second one is, how do you stand out from the crowd based on that fight for inbox supremacy? Like, how do you stand out amongst the crowd? So really, the average email attention span is very short. We as marketers would absolutely love it if we had a healthy database at all times that took an hour to read every single email that we put out and enjoy every single word of it. The reality is not that. Whilst there are going to be advocates of your brand, of your company, that are going to invest a lot of time and effort into reading everything you put out, the reality is there are going to be those that skim. There are going to be those that glance. And the average email attention span is just 11 seconds. So the real question is, how can you turn those that previously glance at what you do into skimmers? How can you turn those who skim into readers? How can you make that conversion up almost the attention span ladder? And with it being just 11 seconds, you need to find tactics that you can deploy that are going to make you stand out when there are loads of emails coming through at the same time. Certainly one that I know, Guy, you've mentioned before that you're very passionate about is there seems to be this default that everyone will always send emails out on the hour, which perhaps for ease's sake is done. But in reality, if everyone's doing that, is there a missed opportunity to send emails out at quarter to the hour or quarter past the hour? And certainly that's not the only thing that you can look at when it comes to standing out and differentiating yourself. That one's a very simple one. It doesn't take much time or effort to do that. This one is perhaps slightly retail specific when it comes to discount, but I would almost extend this out if retail isn't your sector. Extend this out to go beyond the norm or go beyond the standard play is perhaps what you'd phrase this as. For retail, that's going to be discount. For others, that might be something else. If all retail companies are doing discounts, how on earth can you stand out? There is a good reason why so many companies default to discount at this time of the season. It is an effective tactic. It works, and I wouldn't suggest stopping doing that. But it's how you can stand out. How can you incorporate other tactics to go alongside that? Because whilst it is an effective tool, it is almost a bit of a safety blanket. It is still overutilized, in my humble opinion. How can you go a bit further? So, how do you beat the frenzy to slash prices? You can offer value added products to drive sales, complimentary gifts, a bonus night on a hotel booking, to be very specific. These sorts of things are adding value to the people that you're talking to in a way that doesn't just put on the normal tag of 10%, 20%. This is what we can offer. It's an opportunity to let your brand's personality really shine through. What are you about? What do you stand for? This is where you can really entertain and educate, and almost give them something that they're not expecting. Everyone is expecting these discounts to come through at this time of year. How do you offer something that maybe in a good way is a surprise? How do you offer something that they weren't perhaps anticipating? Because that can increase loyalty and that can increase customer lifetime value, which is something we'll touch on a bit later on as well. Just a few tactics within the content itself. So GIFs have been around for a very long time, but I would still argue the trend is heading towards them, because ultimately adding animation within an email in a lot of instances where you're not just doing it for the sake of it, but certainly where you are painting a picture that does more than just a static image does, it can grab the subscriber's attention. Again, if you have only got those 11 seconds to play with, as soon as you open the email, you can be hit with an animated image at the top of the email. You can show off products, you can show off services, you can tease something that's coming up. It provides an extra visual interest that perhaps a static image doesn't do, and it can point them towards the action you want them to take, or as the words on the screen say there, can get them to keep scrolling throughout the entire message, keep their interest for some of the other bits you've got coming up a bit later on in the email. And somewhat related to that, we've got video in email. So I would still personally look at video in email as an emerging technology, because if you're taking the standard database, and this is going to vary company to company, probably only about 50% of people within your database are going to be able to see video and email based on the technological restraints of it at the moment. But you can see on the left-hand side, I'm not going to read them all out, but video and email is proving itself as a really effective tool, almost a step above and beyond what a GIF is. It really brings the email to life. Again, you need to think about accessibility concerns around video and email. I won't lie on that front. And you do need to think about what percentage of your database are actually going to see this. And do you indeed have the technological capabilities to pull this off? But if you do, it's certainly a tactic I would look to deploy at this time of year, and indeed any time of year, really. Another way to potentially stand out, a bit of a buzzword, BIMI. I think, Guy, you're probably very well qualified to talk about BIMI.
A pet topic of mine. So BIMI is brand indicators for message identification. It's a protocol which allows you to show your approved business logo right next to your emails in the inbox. And the good news is that Gmail came to the party last year in terms of supporting this, and Apple has just started supporting BIMI as well. So that means you've got roughly 90% of global mailboxes covered. And the advantage is that subscribers quickly buy into and understand that seeing that logo means they can trust the email. That trust translates into better open rates. And we've also seen some great industry research from Redshift showing that it also translates into factors like improved brand recall and improved likelihood to go and buy your products and services. So that's my top tip for standing out in the inbox. If you haven't adopted BIMI yet, think about it straight away.
Onto the third tip. So onto automation. The tip itself, automation is invaluable. I can't stress that enough, really. Email automation is ultimately, as it says on the screen there, reaching the right people with the right message at the right time. It is a really powerful tool. And I would still argue, even though it has been around for a little while now, it is still underutilized. And there are opportunities for people to use automated journeys where they're not doing so at the moment. And I think perhaps one of the intimidating factors about automation, which is perhaps causes the hesitancy, is that it can be incredibly complicated, automation, but it doesn't need to be as a starting point. Automation can be very sophisticated, where you have got multiple branches out depending on decisions. And that's brilliant for when that's necessary. And I think people sometimes just look at that and think, if I can't replicate that, I shouldn't touch automation. That isn't the case. Automation can start very simply with just a couple of emails and one or two decisions here or there. And you can build it out from there. It's not like you should build an automation and then just leave it, which is something I'd like Guy to touch on in a second, because whilst automation certainly is efficient from the sake that you can set it up and you can let it run and there isn't a lot of manual intervention required, sometimes there's a bit of a misleading thing of it's easy and you don't have to touch it again for years after that, when that should never be the case, right, Guy?
Absolutely. I mean, every business should have rules in place to revisit their automated content maybe every 6 or 12 months. I think we saw great examples of when this doesn't happen during the COVID lockdown, and people were signing up for email programs and the welcome email was saying something like, hey, thanks for signing up and really looking forward to seeing you in one of our stores soon. And no, not really. It happens at more practical levels as well. I saw an example recently where a sender had changed email service provider, and as a result of doing that, they had also changed their sending domain, and they'd been proactive enough to update this on all of their promotional emails. So the new "please add us to your trusted senders list" had the correct domain on the promo emails, but they had forgotten to do that with their triggered emails. Out of sight was out of mind, and even in a small way, that impacts deliverability too. So definitely have a business process in place to revisit that triggered content on a regular basis.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. In terms of what an automated journey can look like, just to take you through a very sort of brief example of this, there will always be some form of trigger point to kick off an automated journey. And what that is can vary a lot. It could be a sign up on a website. It could be the purchase of a specific product from your web store. In this example here, it's someone who has given their email to get access to a free ebook, just as an example. So they fill out the form, and the way that you would devise it is the email comes directly into your email service provider, whatever that might be. And that's when the journey really kicks off in terms of sending them an email, building in delays. So if you've got multiple emails that are going out as part of this journey, you want to build in delays to ensure they're not getting to one after the other. It's, waiting a couple of days or a week or whatever might be appropriate for the journey that you've put in place. And then ultimately any decisions that you want. So again, with the example here, they've been sent the ebook, and there's a decision made as to have they clicked on the email that has given them access to the ebook. And you might want to treat those people differently. Like if they have clicked on the email, you might want to presume that they have had no problem whatsoever in accessing the ebook and enjoying it. And you might want to put them into a separate journey as a result of that, in which case they would fulfill the yes criteria that you can see on the screen there. But if they haven't clicked the email, you might want to check in, just a nudge to find out, did they get the previous email? You requested this. Is this something you're still interested in? Just to give them that prompt. Again, you don't want to keep it linear in that you don't want to treat everyone the same, because if you're sending it to those that actually have clicked through and have accessed it fine, it could be a bit annoying to receive an email of, oh, it hasn't worked out for you, has it? It's not entirely true. So that's where you can build in decisions into automated journeys and start to get a level of sophistication behind them. Again, all feeds back into the relevant and personalized info that was mentioned earlier. Before you crack on with automation, of course, you need to think about planning considerations. So what do you need to consider before going ahead with this? So certainly in terms of the data, do you have what you need? And if you don't, how do you need to reconfigure things in order to either fit the data that you have or gain the data that you don't have, one or the other? Rules, who is in the segment, what's the send hierarchy, when should the send occur? That's all very important. And then in terms of the content itself, how can you make it personalized without it being overbearing? A very important consideration when it comes to automation. One specific example of an automated email, abandoned basket or abandoned cart. It's a few different names out there, essentially the same thing. $18 billion, it's estimated, are lost due to abandoned carts, abandoned baskets, which is a huge amount. And ultimately, we know that a certain percentage of that 18 billion cannot be retrieved because an active decision has been made. They don't want it anymore, which is fine. But in a lot of instances, it is going to be forgotten, or it is just going to need that extra prompt or that extra incentive in order to get that sale over the line. And ultimately, if you've got these set up, really, after the setup process, it's all wins. You don't really lose much by having this. It's not like you can lose the sale further, if that makes sense. It's all to be gained. I think with abandoned basket emails, my advice would be there is a bit of a tightrope to walk, because it is somewhere in the middle of a marketing and a transactional email, because you're going to be talking to some people who you just want to really do it on a transactional basis because it is just forgotten and they still have every intention to purchase. With some, it might be that they've gone a bit cold on the idea, but could be swayed back into it by something, maybe cross-selling or upselling. So I think my advice here would be to somewhat keep both considerations in mind when you're thinking of the content that should appear in an abandoned basket email. Catchy yet informative might be the way to go. At this point, I'll hand over to Guy.
Awesome. So I suppose my top tip is work on your deliverability, because there's a straight line relationship between great deliverability and great program revenue. And I think, just to provide a bit of context with the next few slides, when we talk about deliverability, we're not just talking about sent minus bounced. We're considering the concept of what percentage of the emails that you're sending to your customers actually end up in their inboxes where they're going to see them and they're going to engage with them. So we're going to run through a couple of things to think about to help achieve that. And the first is a really simple idea. It's think like a mailbox provider. So for those of you in our audience, I will wager that by the time you've added Gmail, Microsoft, and your Yahoo addresses together, they probably form about 80% of your list. In some cases, it's as much as 90%. And even if you're a B2B sender, by the time you think about your Office 365 subscribers, that's probably a third of your list. G Suite's another third. And a lot of the same deliverability rules apply to both. So when you're thinking about how to improve your deliverability, knowing what's important to these providers is a really, really good place to start. And all of them publish excellent advice for high volume marketing senders. And a lot of it, as I've documented on this slide, is common across all of them. So they want to see robust sending infrastructure. So by that, we're talking about things like having your authentication in place. They want to see IP address permanence. They want to know that you've got a proactive strategy for suppressing bounces and complaints and opt-outs. They want to know that you're using high quality address data. We've already talked about that earlier in the session. They want to know that those addresses belong to subscribers who actually want to receive your marketing emails. And they want to see a friction-free route when it comes to your subscribers wanting to opt out from your program. So this is like a really common sense deliverability checklist, and every sender should be using it as a foundation stone for inbox placement success. And I'll come back and reference this a couple of times as we move through the rest of our slides. So moving on to my next concept, let's talk about reputation for a second. So a really simple way to understand how the major mailbox providers view your program means knowing what your sender reputation looks like. And if you're not familiar with this, the sender reputation, it's a bit like a credit score for email marketers. And you know, the better the score, the more favorable your treatment. And that means more likelihood that your emails get placed in your subscribers' inboxes. And as I say, that's where they engage with them and they're going to buy your products and services. So there's several reputation checking tools. Our personal favorite is senderscore.org. And you can quickly gauge your current score and the likelihood of whether you may be experiencing any email deliverability problems or not. And if you're seeing more volatile performance, so if you have a look at the red quadrant, which I'm highlighting here, that suggests that this particular sender is in trouble. And then you can drill down to understand what aspects of the program are making them look bad to the mailbox providers. So in this case, high levels of user-generated spam complaints and unknown users, which relates to data quality. So that's a really useful sort of top-level diagnostic tool to see if you've got a deliverability challenge or not, and if so, where you need to start in terms of mediating for it. Moving on, Ben touched on timing, and he's absolutely right. You know, we periodically hear from our mailbox provider partners, and their first request is, you know what? Everybody sends their emails at the top of the hour. We see 70% of our total traffic in the first 10 minutes of the hour. And it makes it harder for all those senders because, believe it or not, even Microsoft and Gmail have finite processing capacity. And so deliverability gets tougher. So you offset those sends, you're more likely to get delivered and you're more likely to stand out at a time when your competitors aren't there. I'd also add to it, it's a great opportunity, especially moving into a busy period like the one that's coming up, to think about using a brand intelligence tool like mail charts and have a look at what your competitors are doing. And most importantly, when they're sending their emails. So if you find that, as a rule, everybody in the beauty product sender is sending their emails at between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, maybe think that it might be a really good idea to be sending yours at 10 or 11 in the morning, where you stand out from the competition and you've basically got a free run at your potential subscribers. Next thing, we touched on Apple MPP a little bit earlier, mail privacy protection. And when it comes to inbox placement rates, what you can see from Validity's benchmarks is that while the sort of Gmails, the Microsofts, the Yahoos are all running in around about mid 80%, Apple mailboxes are substantially worse at only 69%. And they're actually declining as we speak. Now, remember that MPP is an Apple mail feature. It's not a mailbox provider specific feature. And there's differences in adoption across the mailbox providers. But what we do know, iCloud mailboxes are more likely to be iPhone users. It means they're more likely to be Apple Mail users. And it's therefore far more likely that they've got MPP enabled. So definitely overrepresenting amongst iCloud users. Now, Apple's deliverability guidance is very similar to the others that we looked at a couple of slides ago, and their recommended best practices range includes consent, infrastructure, authentication, and engagement. Now, the first 3 of those are going to be constant to all the providers, so it must be lower engagement that's the variable factor at Apple. And if you think about it, senders typically look back over a 12-month period, and now they're not seeing a lot of those real opens for their Apple Mail users that they did previously. It means less accurate engagement metrics for a significantly growing portion of their subscribers, and it is being reflected in declining inbox placement rates for those users. So how do you tackle that? Because that's a significant part of most email lists. And there's a couple of quick wins, which I'm going to run through pretty rapidly. We touched on email address validation. Now is a really good time to run your full database through a validation check before we get to that busy period. Find the addresses in your list which may be harmful to your deliverability and suppress them. Preference center promotion. So, many email marketing programs have great preference centers, and it's like it's their best kept secret. They never promote them. So driving awareness means your customer data is more accurate, it's up to date, and that boosts your deliverability. So we've got this really great example from Harrods here that shows how it should be done. They're appealing to their customer interests, what frequency they want to receive their emails, what channels they want to receive them through, not just email, all reflected in the preference center and enabling Harrods to make their messaging more relevant to their subscribers. And then finally, thinking about reactivation as well. So, touching back onto MPP, it makes having engaged email subscribers more important. Next few weeks is a really great opportunity to find out for sure. We've got this excellent example from the Body Shop, which gives you the template. They're offering a financial incentive to re-engage. They're also appealing to their customers' sense of belonging. They're enticing them with products that they've bought previously. They're restating their social responsibility. And fantastic if they get their customers to respond, but if they don't, they're suppressing them to make sure they're mailing to a clean, engaged list. Two more quick wins. So one of my personal favorite topics is the principle of transparent unsubscribing. And this is a very simple concept. In my mind, there's a strong case for senders to position their unsubscribes at the top of the email where they are more visible. Yes, it might drive up your opt-out rates a little. It's certainly going to drive down your spam complaint rates, which is a negative deliverability metric. And senders also benefit from increased trust as a result of that greater transparency. And then snooze functionality. We had a question from Anthony a little bit earlier saying, when it comes to relevance, surely relevance is a function of also not sending people what they don't want to receive. And that's exactly the point here. I think, you go through a busy period like the one that's coming up, there is this risk of increased fatigue. Letting your subscribers take a temporary break from your program can actually have a positive impact, and you don't lose them permanently. We've got this great example from Dyson. Subscribers are given an opportunity to snooze their emails just over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday long weekend, also provided with an opportunity to sign up specifically for special offers on products that they really are interested in. So two great practices for the price of one. Wrapping up my deliverability top tip on my final slide is this principle of get certified. This is the ultimate quick win. Validity's Sender Certified program, part of our suite of Everest Email Intelligence. It's an exclusive global allow list, and leading mailbox providers, like most of the ones that we've already referenced, and spam filtering companies around the world, recognize certified senders as strong and reputable and trustworthy. And in turn, this means much better deliverability, improved throughput, and direct access to their exclusive data. And we did an analysis with Amasis a little while back of 20 certified email programs, and it showed an average increase in program revenue of around £30,000 per million emails sent by each of those 20 senders, which is quite impressive. There we go. That's section 4, done and dusted.
Thank you very much, Guy. And we'll go on to the final of our 5 tips. This is probably going to be the shortest one of the lot, but is definitely not the least the one you should least listen to. Act now, but think ahead. So it might at first glance sound perhaps counterproductive in that this is almost thinking about the other quarters in a Q4 presentation, but ultimately your view of how you look at Q4 is going to dictate Q1 to Q3 of the next calendar year. Q4 might mean easier, perhaps quicker sales, But how can you go beyond that short-term view? How can you grab the attention of those subscribers so they're not just purchasing something from you now and will never return, or they'll only return, but they'll return at this point next year? Can you gain any value out of these subscribers between now and then? Because 12 months is a long time in business. Many businesses have figured out how to secure the short-term sales, but fewer have figured out how to really retain those newer customers and keep that interest alive outside of peak season. So if we're offering up a few examples here, if the short-term view, there might be a lack of customer lifetime value. From a data perspective, you might just be focused on grabbing the email address and absolutely nothing else. And that's all you need because you have a very short-term view. Perhaps the longer-term view is, can you gain an extra profile field or an extra couple of profile fields, either on acquisition of the email address or indeed after that point through sort of follow-up emails? Can you gain more info, which can lead to more relevant content later down the line? From an automation point of view, so linking back to our third tip, a short-term view might be to put them in an automation that simply ends at the end of December. But have you got a longer-term view? Can you actually at the close of this season, depending on what they've done, depending on what they've purchased, can you put them into a longer-term automation plan as well as your overall sort of sending pattern? These are the things that, whilst it might be directly impacting the quarter that we're not looking at here, it's actually the foundations that are set in Q4 that will then impact what happens in the following quarters. So thinking months ahead rather than thinking weeks ahead. And I think you've probably summed it up best, Guy, with the term value equation. I think that equilibrium is very important.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the principle. I think increasingly marketing in general and email marketing specifically is very much about a two-way relationship. And obviously brands want to extract value out of their customers, but increasingly I think, those customers are thinking, what's in it for me? And I think some of that is hard financial value. You give them discounts, you offer them free delivery, etc. But it's also sort of more intangible as well. It's providing useful information, it's providing handy tips, it's even sort of, as I say, establishing that sense of community, stating your thoughts and your principles around social conscience, for example. All of that is value. And I think when consumers believe that there's a similar amount of value in the equation for them, then you've got healthy, happy relationships which last a long time.
Absolutely. Before we get into the Q&A portion, we're about 45 minutes in, which is what we said we were going to do. Just a few key takeaways from those 5 points. Firstly, treat data as the starting point because you won't go too far without it. Definitely make that one of your highest priorities when it comes to considerations. The fight for prominence in the inbox is tougher in Q4 than at any point in the year. So those tactics that we went through, think about deploying them. How do you stand out? Automation remains an underutilized tool that should play an integral part of your Q4 plan. Think like a mailbox provider, as we all do, should be at the top of your list as well. And maintain that long-term view and increase the lifetime value of a customer. And with that, we'll head to any questions. I've got one to kick off, and this one's probably best directed towards you, Guy, and it comes back to BIMI. Because as we know with BIMI at the moment, it's a very effective tool, but perhaps a costly one. I know in terms of the certification, there's only a couple of companies out there that provide it at the moment. What should really be at the center of your decision-making process when it comes to, is this a good idea for my business now?
So when I was sort of briefly talking about the benefits of BIMI, I talked about the importance of recognition. And I'll expand on that a little bit. The DMA publishes a great report every year called the Consumer Email Tracker. And it's a very email subscriber focused piece of research. It's one of only a few that we get where consumers are asked their opinions on what they think about all the damn things that we're sending to them. And one of the questions they're asked is, what's the most important factor in your mind when it comes to persuading you to open an email that's in your inbox? And you would think that the obvious answer is, well, it's killer subject line, of course. And interestingly, while subject lines are important, the top answer, even more so than that, is I recognize and I trust the person that sent this email to me. And that's exactly where BIMI comes into play, because you're seeing that logo, you're quickly coming to understand that it's a sign of trust and security, and it therefore sort of plays a role in driving the open of that email. And it stands out as well. It's why, even though sort of name personalization's a bit old hat these days, it's still effective, because what are you more familiar with than anything else in the world than your own name? When you see that in a subject line, it stands out because you recognize it. And the principle of BIMI using logos that you recognize is exactly the same. So I think that's why it works. Certainly senders that we've worked with that have implemented it already have absolutely seen the benefits that I've outlined. I think there's an opportunity here to be an early adopter. Not everyone's doing it yet, probably less than 1 in 10 senders. We're probably going to get to a stage in 2 or 3 years where everybody does it, and then the advantage is gone. So, fastest movers are going to benefit the most.
Absolutely. I think just like anything, when it comes to email marketing or indeed marketing generally, it has to be viewed as an investment and not a cost. That's what it is ultimately.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Another question that came through regarding automation, which I think I can take, is directed towards actually what sort of delays should be in place. What's right? Should I be waiting a day? Should I be waiting a week? It might be a slightly cop-out answer, but it is going to be massively dependent on what the automated journey is that you've got in place, and ultimately what the objective is. What do you want them to do in that next stage? Because there are some instances where leaving it a week is going to be too long and you've almost lost that momentum. So perhaps you want to look at it being a couple of days instead. I think personally, that 2 or 3 day delay is probably about right, but certainly it is a case by case basis. Would you have anything to add to that, Guy?
I think you're right. I mean, what makes any form of automated email effective, it's just because it's far more relevant, and a lot of that relevancy comes down to being time specific. It's catching one of your customers effectively while they are in a buying frame of mind and giving them a nudge to say, hey, let's complete that process. So I think that timing is going to vary, and I'm going to give the classic weasel consultant answer: it depends.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a reason why they are so effective, and I think there's some great research talking to the revenue effectiveness of triggered emails as well, where sort of a good average value for a typical business as usual marketing email is maybe like 10p per email. Depending on exactly what form of automation you're using, it can be 10x or 15x higher than that. I think there used to be an old rule of thumb that if you could get 5% of your total email volume triggered and automated, it's going to generate 50% of your program revenue. There's a reason for that.
Absolutely. I think with that, glad to see that we've pretty much kept to time here. There is always that fear, you never know. Is it going to go 20 minutes or 2 hours? But we said 45, we've got 49 in there. I think we can count that as a win. Thank you very much, Guy, for agreeing to take part in this. And a thank you to Validity as a whole for your help in terms of the promotion of the event. It's been really great to prepare this and plan this and ultimately deliver it with you. And I think there are some great insights that you've been able to deliver. So thank you from me and all of Jerome. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for the invite. Loved being here, and let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. To anyone attending or indeed watching on catch up, if you do have any questions for myself or Guy after the event, please do get in touch and we'll be happy to help you on your way when it comes to email marketing. But for here and for this webinar, we'll close things off. Thank you very much for joining indeed.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.